Okay, I'm going to make some predictions here. And hello? Yeah. I'm going to make some predictions. I don't like to make predictions. I think it's a bad idea to make predictions in general. Part of the reason for that is that they're usually wrong. And that's one of the reasons why I want to make a prediction. Because I have this kind of superstitious feeling that if I predict it, it won't happen. And I very much don't want this to happen. But this is genuinely what I see happening in the U.S. political season here. I think what's going to happen is that Donald Trump will win the election. And the Democrats will not accept that result. I think all signs show indicate this setup. From the point of view of those who are enfranchised in the system, which is essentially the Democrats are the ones who have all the government jobs, all of the corporate jobs, not all, but many. It's the majority of government, corporate, and academic. So, much of the professional class, essentially, they are of the belief that Donald Trump is Hitler. And they see him as an existential threat to our nation. And conveniently, the other side, which is sort of everyone else, see the Democrats as an existential threat to our nation. So this is just about as perfect a divide and conquer mechanism you could imagine. And it has the added benefit because I think that reasonable people see indications that the Democrats indeed are the greatest threat to our nation because they're the most anti-democratic force happening. And they've come to believe that their objectives should be achieved by any means necessary. And they are allied with the deep state, with the military-industrial complex, with pharma, with all of these malevolent institutions that have created chaos around the world and caused hardship around the world and caused death around the world. And so reasonable people will see them as the greatest threat. But if you are within the blue church, it's an inverted sensibility about the world. And I think it's largely because, you can't convince anyone of anything that their paycheck depends on them not understanding. So I think in many respects, you could say that these are people who are basically being paid off. And there are a variety of sort of platitudes, which is essentially what wokeism functions as, a set of nice-sounding beliefs that have relatively horrible outcomes. Not as horrible as some of the things that are happening as a result of the other alliances within the Democrat Party. But nevertheless, they are the ones who hold 70% of the nation's wealth. And because of all this institutional power, they have the levers of the government at their disposal. And we've seen incrementally how they have gradually just made the rules whatever they want them to be. So this whole transition from Biden to Harris was just like, yeah, she's our gal. They would have had to follow the 25th Amendment in order for there to be a, let's say, reasonable transfer from the established candidate of Biden to that of Harris. They didn't bother to do that. So we've seen how they kind of wiggle the rules all the time now. This is also evident in their lawfare activities. And their excuse through the whole thing has been Trump. And, Trump will occasionally provide them with sound bites, which I think is his job. His job, as I see it, is to be the discreditor in chief. He is someone who will play the role necessary for both sides. He's playing a kayfabe role. It's professional wrestling. And his job is to be the hero villain. It's just too perfect, the kinds of things that come out of his mouth. It really just plays into both sides too perfectly. So I don't see him as a genuine actor, and that's why I feel that this unity coalition is going to be a disaster, just because he's not a genuine player. He's not a reliable actor. And the benefit of having all of the dissidents go into the Trump camp is that it allows the administrative state to dispense with all resistance in one fell swoop, because they're all under the umbrella of Hitler. So they can easily be dismissed. Anyone who's made a deal with Trump has made a deal with the devil, and so they're not deserving of any respect or credence. This obviously is of tremendous benefit to institutions such as the military-industrial complex and pharma, because you have people within the Trump camp now who are extremely critical of pharma. RFK Jr., for example, he's also very critical of the military-industrial complex. And so from the point of view of the Blue Church, these people are just discredited on the basis of their affiliation with Trump. And so if America decides to put Trump into office, that also reaffirms their belief that America are a bunch of white racists and they don't deserve the vote anymore. And so this is actually a replay of what's happened in other nations now, where it's usually the U.S. State Department goes in and they help the government, a willing government. If not, they'll overthrow the government and then do this. They arrest all the dissidents, right? They'll basically create like a color revolution. All the dissidents pop up. They gather them up. They do lawfare against them. They arrest them, throw them in jail, and then they have an election with whoever's left. And they call that democracy. But yeah, there's some very interesting things about this. I mean, if it weren't so terrible, but I mean, it is funny, but on the other hand, it's horribly tragic, particularly if we take the traditional view that a democracy should be a real thing. Although I think evidence suggests that it never has been a real thing. And so one wonders the extent to which the thing that we're trying to restore has ever been in place. In other words, to what extent has the will of the people ever really had anything to do with what happens ultimately in politics? And secondarily, and perhaps more fundamentally, to what extent is the will of the people something that should be guiding politics? Now, I think the concerns of the people should be taken into account by those who are in the leadership class, but that doesn't mean that what the people want is necessarily going to be the best thing. In fact, it quite often isn't. I think it takes a great degree of wisdom and subtlety to formulate policy that actually serves the interests of the nation at large. And, that's not to say that that's happening at all. I think right now the reason why people are more motivated than they have been in recent years to get involved in politics is because their concerns are being completely ignored. We see that over and over again. But yeah, I think if there ever was a democracy in this country, it's kind of late to try to seize the reins of it and get it back on its feet, because there are two main kind of formal reasons why we're in deep trouble here. One of them is called the multipolar trap, and the other one is called minority rule. And in essence, the multipolar trap says that if you have a playing field and a set of rules, as long as everyone abides by the rules, then you can have a fair game. I mean, in some ways, it's just the most obvious thing ever. Once one person breaks the rules, it creates an unfair advantage on their part, and they then are able to basically destroy all the other players unless the other players follow suit and also break the rules. And so once you have someone who breaks the rules, you have essentially a race to the bottom, where ever more foundational rules get broken. So you get a little bit of breaking on things that don't seem to matter as much, and that is kind of the beginning of the process of corruption, and at the end, it's a bloodbath. And that's how civilizations deteriorate. And so you have that in the mess of the bloodbath, everyone realizes, you know what, we can't live like this anymore. We've got to establish some rules. And so then you have those who have the determination to do that. They set a new set of rules. It lasts for a certain amount of time, and then people start nibbling away at it. And that is just, I see no way to avoid that pattern. I don't know how it could possibly be avoided unless the rules were just so ironclad that no one could wiggle out. And maybe that's what the globalists are trying to establish. They want a social control system that is so micromanagement that anything that wiggles is immediately straightened out. I mean, it's a horrifying thing to contemplate, but obviously everyone is aware that this is a factor nowadays with the surveillance and the kind of punishments that happen as a result of wrong think or wrong speak. But you can understand why there would be a desire on the part of totalitarians to just finally get a system that doesn't fall apart and to end the nonstop bickering and warfare and all the various, conflicts that nations have, that different peoples have. I think the impulse for a global system goes all the way back to the biblical times, this idea of the Messiah, Mashiach, who will rule the world, and that all the nations will be under this one figure, and everyone will agree that this is the figure that they're going to bow down to. And I'm not saying this is good or bad, I'm just saying that this has been obviously a dream for some for a very, very long time, and that there are some good reasons why people would want that dream. So I forgot to describe the minority rule. It's another basic principle. It's kind of a game theory principle. In the same way as the multipolar trap, it's kind of ironclad. So you have a minority that's intransigent, meaning that they insist upon something. And you have a majority that's transigent, meaning, they're not all that together. They're kind of wishy-washy. They don't really have a coherent identity or a set of principles that they all abide on. That means that essentially the minority can rule. The minority can set the rules for the entire group, for everyone. And if you take these two things together, there's a couple of other details to the minority rule I'm not going to bother with, but there's a couple other conditions that are necessary for it to be operational. One of them has to do with the degree to which the minority is dispersed throughout the population. So they kind of have to be a little bit of them everywhere, basically. At any rate, if you take these two things together, the multipolar trap, which is the race to the bottom, and the minority rule, which says that the intransigent group, no matter their size, can dominate the rest. Both of those things are active right now to the extreme. You can see that in essence the Democrats are intransigent. They don't care what the arguments are. They're not interested in listening. They've already made up their minds. They don't care what the facts are. It's not open for discussion. And they're essentially in agreement. They're in agreement on the basis of a common hatred for Donald Trump. And that's the way you get a group to cohere, is through an enemy. Everyone has to agree on who the enemy is. And they've done it. And they no longer care about the rules. Because when your enemy is Hitler, it doesn't matter what the rules are. The goal is to get Hitler. Right? And I think that this really more realistically paints the picture of where we are right now than any other analysis I've heard. Because I don't see any of that changing. There's no way that Democrats are going to admit that many of the things that they believe about Trump are wrong. Which, by the way, doesn't make Trump any better. But it is the set of things that keep them locked in their hatred of him to the point that they're willing to break all the rules, irrespective of the will of the people. It's obvious. That's the setup. That's where we are. And I don't see any of it changing because they're intransigent. They don't care. They are on a mission. They believe that the fate of the world depends upon their defeating Trump. And if Trump wins, they're going to go nuclear. It's pull out the stops time. They won't accept it. And they have all the positions within the institutions. So yeah, my prediction for the U.S. election is that Trump will win. He may take office for a short period of time, or he may not. But I think that what will probably result in his being ousted from government, whether it's before his administration begins or after, is the level of chaos that's happening elsewhere in the world. I think if we see the beginning of World War III, for example, they will simply say, no, this is too serious. We need the so-called adults to maintain control over things. Now, there's two things about this. One is that it probably will make more sense if they do this after Trump is in office, because then they can blame the chaos on him. So if he takes office and then things really go sideways and everything just goes completely nuts, that will give them the added emphasis, the urgency necessary to declare a state of emergency, in essence, and to essentially declare his administration null and void. And from thenceforth, we will run as an administrative state, which has been the wet dream of technocrats since they started seeing what was happening in China. And I think that a lot of this is happening in concert with China. But I think that there's another dimension to all of this, too. Because I don't think that this new administrative state is going to be governing with the concerns of the American people whatsoever. I think that the world is disgusted with the American people. It's disgusted with the American government. And the world wants to see this nation destroyed. And the only way that they will get their satisfaction for the crimes that the United States has committed. Because, I mean, if you look at from the point of view of the world, what the United States has been since World War II, before even, definitely before, right? But even just since World War II, what you see is an ever more arrogant world power just doing whatever it wants to do on the world stage, destroying nations, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, just ruthlessly creating additional chaos and destruction in Syria. And yeah, no concern for international law, basically scrapped international law. And on some of the most important issues like nuclear treaties, right? The Trump administration nullified one of the most important nuclear treaties. So that, in addition to the fact that Americans have been these kind of like flagrant, conspicuous consumers who, the world has watched the entertainments of the United States where people are just living these ridiculous, grotesque lifestyles. And it's just an obscenity, particularly when so much of the rest of the world is living on a few dollars a day and subject to these insane U.S. foreign policy objectives, and not to mention the economic warfare that's been taking place against all these other nations so that all of the riches of the world can pour into the United States. And then, when the American people finally decide to wake up and do something, all they can agree upon is that they need better health care. I think that's just an incredibly bad look on the world stage and something that the rest of the world totally sees. Americans don't see it at all. And I that's one of the big problems that I have with MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. From the point of view of an American, of course, I understand, yes, we should get our health back together. Maybe we could get everything else back together if we had some health, particularly the health of the children. Because, yeah, there's obviously been a kind of biological warfare against the American people. Our food is toxic and just so many things. Just the whole system is designed to make people unhealthy. But I'm talking about the perspective from the rest of the world, the behavior of our nation, and our attitude in the context of that behavior is really kind of disgusting. So I think the rest of the world wants to see the United States destroyed, and the West in general. And it looks very much like that's the program. That's precisely what's happening. And so I think those who are hoping that this new administrative state will, provide smoother sailing in the future are completely delusional. In the same way that I think those who think that a Trump administration is going to make meaningful reforms that get us back on the right track. I have more sympathy with the team that's assembled there. I very much like RFK Jr. and Tulsi, I think, has many good points as well. And Vivek is obviously an extremely smart guy. And Elon Musk, I think, would be a great guy to get our systems more functional, I just don't see it working out. And again, I'm predicting this in the hopes that it will increase the odds that I'm wrong about all of this. I have problems with all these characters. I don't hate Trump the way that the Blue Church hates him, but I don't think he's appropriate as a leader at all. I think basically he would be fine if he just stuck to entertainment. That would be fine with me. But as a politician, as a leader, as someone who's making important calls on what's going to happen, no. Sorry. He just doesn't. He doesn't have the intelligence or the qualifications or the understanding of what's going on. Let him just do his entertainment shtick. I think that would be fine. He can be amusing from time to time. But if he's the guy actually calling the calls, I don't see it working out well, no matter who's around him. He has a long history of having falling outs with people who don't see everything his way. And I have a hard time seeing how RFK is going to integrate into that kind of an environment. But again, hopefully I'm wrong about all of this.